90%. That is the mortality rate biologists recorded in a single winter for moose calves in parts of Maine.
Winter ticks wiped out nearly 90% of moose calves tracked by scientists in part of Maine last year. A total of 60 calves died in an area northwest of Moosehead Lake.
Think about that. 9 out of every 10 babies wiped out in a few months. When the experts went to investigate, they didn't find signs of a struggle. They found animals that had literally been eaten alive from the outside in.
She's completely pale. You know, this is, to me, when her organs are this coloration, that's a sign of anemia, meaning she was being fed on by ticks.
This isn't just a sad nature story. It is a biological collapse happening in real time. The culprit is an ancient enemy that has suddenly gained a terrifying new advantage, and it is turning the peaceful forests of New England into a slaughterhouse. 60 graves in the snow. The spruce fir forests of northern Maine are supposed to be quiet, but they aren't supposed to be this quiet. This is the domain of the giant, the moose. Alces. If you have ever stood next to one, you know the feeling. They stand 6 feet high at the shoulder, tipping the scales at over 1,000 pounds. They are the undisputed monarchs of the New England woods. They are tough. They are resilient. They have survived ice ages and brutal winters that would snap a human in half. But starting around the early 2010s, people began noticing something wrong. It wasn't something you would see right away. It was more like a feeling that the woods were becoming a graveyard. Hunters were finding carcasses where they shouldn't be. Hikers were reporting strange pale animals stumbling through the trees. But here's the catch. It wasn't until the winter of 2021 leading into 2022 that the sheer scale of the horror became clear. The biologists at the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, or DIF&W for short, decided it was time to stop guessing and start tracking. They focused on a specific area known as Wildlife Management District 4. This is a massive 2,000 square mile chunk of land in Piscataquis and Somerset counties. It is remote, rugged, and usually it is moose paradise. The plan was simple. They captured 70 moose calves. These are the babies born just the previous spring. They fitted them with high-tech GPS collars. These collars would ping their location to a satellite, letting the biologists watch their every move from the safety of their offices. It was supposed to be a standard study on survival rates, but then the dots on the map started to stop moving. One by one, the signals went flat. A motionless collar usually means one thing: death. At first, it was just a few. That is normal in the wild. Winters are hard, but then the notifications kept coming: ping, stopped, ping, stopped. By the time the snow melted in May, the team looked at their data in disbelief. Out of the 70 calves they had collared, 60 of them were dead. Let that sink in for a second. That is nearly a 90% mortality rate in a single season. This wasn't just a bad winter. This was a slaughter. If 90% of the human population in a city just dropped dead over the winter, it would be the end of civilization. For the moose of District 4, it felt exactly like that. So the biologists put on their boots and went out to recover the collars. They needed to perform necropsies, basically autopsies for animals, to figure out what was wiping out the next generation of moose. They probably expected to find signs of wolves or maybe bears waking up hungry from hibernation, maybe even a new virus. What they found was pure nightmare fuel. The calves were emaciated. They were basically skeletons wrapped in skin. But it was the skin itself that told the story, or rather what was crawling on it. Imagine walking up to a carcass and seeing the fur moving, not because of the wind, but because the animal is covered in a living carpet. We aren't talking about a few fleas, we are talking about tens of thousands of parasites on a single animal. This was the work of the winter tick, Dermacentor albopictus. Now you might be thinking, okay, it's just a tick, I pull those off my dog all the time. Yeah, about that. This isn't your average dog tick. This is a biological weapon designed by nature to take down a giant. And in the changing climate of Maine, this weapon has gone nuclear. When the biologists examined a 12-year-old cow, moose number 59, they stopped counting the ticks because the numbers were just too high to comprehend. She was carrying over 90,000 ticks. 90,000. Think about the weight of that. If you scrape them all off and put them in a bag, they would weigh as much as a heavy winter backpack, but they aren't dead weight, they are hungry, and their food source is blood. The biologists realized that Moose 59 didn't starve to death because there was no food in the forest. She starved because she was being drained dry. Her bone marrow, which should have been creamy and fatty, was gelatinous and red. That is a sign of severe malnutrition. Her body had burned through every single ounce of fat trying to replenish the blood she was losing. She was pregnant too. She was carrying a 12-pound fetus, but the fetus had died inside her long before she collapsed. Her body simply decided it couldn't support 2 lives anymore. It couldn't even support one. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was happening to almost every calf they found. It was a mass casualty event, silent and invisible until you were standing right over the bodies. The investigation revealed that this wasn't just nature taking its course. This was a perfect storm, a mix of biology, forestry, and a planet that is getting hotter by the year. And the scary part is, the moose, the very symbol of the North, never stood a chance. But to understand why this is happening now, we have to look at the tiny monster responsible for this carnage, because the way this tick hunts is something straight out of a science fiction horror movie. The winter tick doesn't hunt alone. It creates a trap that no moose can escape, and once you learn how they attack, you will never look at a brush pile the same way again. Drained dry. So, here is the deal with the winter tick. Most ticks, like the ones that give you Lyme disease, have a complicated life. They jump on a mouse, feed, fall off. Then they find a bigger animal, feed, fall off. Then maybe they find a deer or a human. It is a hard life, and lots of them die before they find that final meal. The winter tick says, forget that. This parasite is what scientists call a one-host tick. It puts all its eggs in one basket, or rather all its hungry babies on one moose. And it doesn't just send 1 or 2 scouts. It sends an army. Here is how the nightmare starts. It begins in late summer and early autumn. The female ticks have laid their eggs on the ground, billions of them. When the eggs hatch, tiny larvae about the size of a pinhead crawl up the stems of plants and bushes. They cluster together in huge groups. Biologists call these questing clusters. Imagine a ball of thousands of tiny interlocking legs, all waving in the air, waiting for something warm to brush past. They smell the carbon dioxide on the breath of a passing animal. They sense the heat. Now picture a moose. It is walking through the woods, pushing through the willow shoots and saplings. It is huge. It is like a moving bus. As it brushes against that vegetation, the cluster explodes. In a split second, thousands of larvae transfer from the plant to the moose. They latch onto the fur and immediately start crawling down toward the skin. But here's the kicker. They don't bite right away and fall off. They settle in. They are moving in for the winter. They are going to spend the next 5 or 6 months living on this animal, feeding, growing, molting, and feeding again. A single moose walking through a bad patch of forest can pick up 30,000, 50,000, or even 100,000 ticks in a single day. Once they are on board, the feast begins. Over the next few months, these tiny larvae grow. They turn into nymphs and then into adults. And every time they grow, they need blood. Lots of it. By late winter, the ticks are fully grown females. They swell up to the size of a grape. They look like gray, bloated beans attached to the animal's skin. Now let's do some quick math. It is terrifying. Biologists estimate that a single engorged female tick drinks about 1 milliliter of blood. That doesn't sound like much, right? It is just a drop. But multiply that by 30,000 or 90,000. We are talking about liters of blood. A calf, which is just a baby, doesn't have that much blood to spare. Losing that much fluid is like a human donating blood every single day for weeks without ever getting a cookie or juice to recover. The moose starts to suffer from acute anemia. The blood loss is so severe that their internal organs start to shut down. When biologists open up these moose during a necropsy, the organs look pale. They look ghostly white because there simply isn't enough red blood moving through them. But it's not just the blood loss that kills them, it is the torture. Imagine having 100,000 bugs biting you at the same time. The itch is unbearable. It is maddening. The moose stop eating. They spend all their time scratching. They use their hooves. They rub against trees. They are desperate to get the things off. This frantic grooming leads to something even worse. They rub their own fur off. A moose's coat is a marvel of nature. It is designed to keep them warm in temperatures that drop to 40 degrees below zero. But as they scratch and rub, they rip that coat apart. They tear out the guard hairs. They expose their bare skin to the brutal Maine winter. Now they are bleeding, they are starving because they are too busy scratching to eat, and they are freezing to death because they have destroyed their own winter coat. It is a triple threat: starvation, exsanguination, which is a fancy word for being drained of blood, and hypothermia. The biologists at the scene in 2022 saw this firsthand. Lee Cantor, the state moose biologist, described it in interviews. He talked about how incredible and terrible it was to see an animal that big brought down by something so small. He called it watching a vampire swarm drain the life from a titan. And the worst part? The moose is uniquely bad at defending itself. See, other animals have dealt with ticks for millions of years. White-tailed deer, for example. They are grooming machines. A deer feels a tick and it grooms it off instantly. They are programmed to keep themselves clean. Moose? Not so much. Moose are actually newcomers to North America. They crossed the land bridge from Asia only about 10 to 15,000 years ago. In evolutionary time, that is like arriving yesterday. Because they haven't been here that long, they never evolved a defense mechanism against the winter tick. They don't have the instinct to groom them off effectively until it is too late. They are what scientists call evolutionarily naive. Basically, they are sitting ducks, and the ticks know it, or rather, biology knows it. The winter tick has found the perfect host, a giant bag of blood that doesn't know how to pick the parasites off. But there is another layer to this tragedy. The tick has always been here. It is a native species. So why is it suddenly wiping out 90% of the calves? Why is it happening now? The answer lies in the air around us. The winters are changing, the snow is coming later, and for the winter tick, that is the best news in the world. The weather is turning the forest into a tick nursery and the results are catastrophic. The perfect storm. Here is where the story gets political, or at least where it touches on the biggest issue of our time: climate change. You see, nature is a delicate balance. Usually the winter tick population is kept in check by the harshness of the Maine winter. Remember those larvae, the ones questing on the plants in the fall? They have a weakness: cold and snow. In the old days, say back in the 1970s or 80s, winter came early to Maine. Hard frost would hit in October, snow would blanket the ground by November. This was bad for the tick, but great for the moose. When the snow covers the ground, the tick larvae are buried. They can't latch onto a moose if they are under 6 inches of powder. The cold snaps would also kill off millions of them before they ever found a host. It was a natural reset button. It kept the parasite numbers low. But the climate in Maine is shifting. According to data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, average temperatures in Maine have risen about 3 degrees Fahrenheit since 1895. That might not sound like a lot. You might think, who cares about 3 degrees? But in the delicate world of parasites, 3 degrees is the difference between life and death. The fall season is stretching out. September is warmer. October is milder. The snow isn't arriving until much later, sometimes not sticking until December or January. This gives the ticks a massive window of opportunity. Instead of having maybe 2 or 3 weeks to find a host, they now have 2 or 3 months. The questing season has been extended. The door to the buffet is left wide open. A study published in the Journal of Wildlife Management confirmed this. They found that warmer falls lead to higher tick abundance. It is a direct correlation. Warmer planet equals more ticks. More ticks equal dead moose. But that's not the only human factor here. We also have to look at the forest itself. Northern Maine isn't just a wilderness, it is a working forest. It is logging country. For over a century, commercial timber companies have been harvesting trees in this region. When you cut down a section of forest, a clear cut, what grows back first? It isn't big trees, it is shrubs, saplings, willows, maples. This is moose food. It is an all-you-can-eat salad bar. In the 1990s, logging practices created a massive amount of this regenerating forest. The moose population exploded. They had unlimited food, their numbers skyrocketed. In some areas of District 4, you have huge densities of moose, up to 40 moose per 10 square miles. That sounds like a success story, right? Lots of moose. But here's the catch. High density is exactly what a parasite wants. If you're a tick, you need your host to walk by you. If there is one moose every 10 miles, your chances are slim. If there are 40 moose crammed into that same space, your chances are excellent. We created a perfect storm. First, we created a habitat that packed the moose together like sardines. Then we warmed up the planet, allowing the ticks to survive longer and breed faster. We basically built a tick factory. The moose are trapped in these tick hotspots. They go there for the food, but they get ambushed by the millions, and the impact goes beyond just the dead calves. The survivors are changed forever. This is where the legend of the ghost moose comes from. We mentioned earlier that the moose rub their fur off. When a moose loses its dark brown outer coat, it exposes the pale whitish undercoat and the raw skin beneath. From a distance against the dark tree line, these animals look white. They look like specters floating through the woods. Sightings of these ghost moose have become common in places like Baxter State Park, but seeing one isn't a magical moment. It is a tragic one. A ghost moose is a sick moose. It is an animal that is so irritated and in so much pain that it has destroyed its only protection against the cold. When hikers see them, they often report that the animals act strangely. They don't run away, they linger on trails, they stare blankly. Why? Because they are exhausted. They are literally too tired to run. Their energy reserves are gone, and even if they survive the winter, the damage is done. A cow that carries a heavy tick load is far less likely to get pregnant the next year. If she does, she is more likely to have a miscarriage, just like Moose 59. So the population takes a hit from two sides. The babies are dying, and the mothers are too weak to make new babies. It is a death spiral. The biologists realized they couldn't just watch this happen. They had to do something. But the solution they came up with is one of the most controversial ideas in the history of wildlife management. To save the moose, they decided they might have to kill them. It sounds insane, but the logic behind it is the only hope these giants have left. The specter in the woods. Let's take a closer look at what it actually means to be a ghost moose. It is a term that sounds spooky, but the medical reality is gruesome. When a moose rubs off its fur, it is breaking the seal that keeps it alive. A healthy moose coat is amazing. It has hollow hairs that trap air, creating a layer of insulation that is almost impervious to cold. Snow can sit on a healthy moose's back and not melt because no body heat is escaping. But when that coat is gone, the heat pours out. The animal starts burning calories just to stay warm. In the dead of winter, calories are hard to find. All they have are twigs and bark. There is very little nutrition in their food. They rely on the fat they stored up during the summer. But remember the ticks, they are taking the blood which carries the nutrients. So the moose is losing energy to the cold and losing energy to the parasites. It is a double withdrawal from a bank account that is already empty. The body starts to consume itself. First, it burns the fat under the skin, then the fat around the kidneys and heart. Finally, it goes for the bone marrow. When Lee Cantor and his team do necropsies, they check the femur bone. In a healthy moose, the marrow is white and waxy. It is solid fat. In these tick-infested calves, the marrow is red and runny. It looks like jelly. That means the animal was running on fumes. It was essentially dead before it hit the ground. And the survivors? They are stunted. A calf that survives a heavy tick winter will be smaller, it will be weaker. It will be less likely to survive a predator attack from a bear or a coyote. Speaking of predators, the ticks are actually changing the entire ecosystem. There is evidence that scavengers, ravens, eagles, coyotes are feasting on these winter carcasses. The woods are littered with easy meals, but there is another twist. The ticks also carry other nasty things like meningeal worms. These are brain worms. While the winter tick doesn't transmit the brain worm directly, the weakened state of the moose makes them vulnerable to everything else. The ghost moose is a symbol of a system that is breaking down. Hikers in New Hampshire and Vermont are seeing it too. In New Hampshire, the tick mortality rate has hit 70%. In some years, Vermont's moose population has crashed by 60% since the year 2000. Maine was supposed to be the stronghold. It has the most land, the most woods, but the line of death is moving north. The warming climate is pushing the tick zone higher and higher into the state. Areas that used to be safe havens are now infection zones. Biologists knew that if they didn't act, the moose in District 4 were going to crash. They needed a plan, but the plan they came up with made a lot of people very angry. It seems counterintuitive. It seems cruel. They proposed an experiment. They wanted to see if reducing the number of moose would actually save the moose. It is called the density dependence theory. If having too many moose is what allows the ticks to explode, then maybe having fewer moose would starve the ticks out. It is a grim calculation. You sacrifice some individuals to save the species, but trying to explain that to the public, trying to tell people that you need to hunt more moose to stop them from dying, that is a hard sell. But in 2022, the state of Maine decided to roll the dice. A warning for the world. So here is the deal. The Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife launched a massive experiment, a real-world test with life and death stakes. They took Wildlife Management District 4 and split it in half. In the western half, they kept things the same, standard hunting quotas. This was the control zone. They would let nature take its course and see what happened. In the eastern half, they did something drastic. They increased the number of hunting permits. Specifically, they issued more permits for antlerless moose, cows, and calves. The goal wasn't to wipe them out. It was to lower the density. They wanted to bring the population down from that high of 40 moose per 10 square miles to something more manageable, maybe 20 or 25. The theory is simple physics. If there are fewer moose walking through the woods, there are fewer buses for the ticks to catch. If a questing cluster of ticks is waiting on a branch and no moose walks by for 3 months, those ticks die. They freeze, they starve, they don't reproduce. By breaking the cycle, you reduce the overall number of ticks in the forest. So, did it work? The experiment is still ongoing, but the early results are fascinating. In the areas where they reduced the herd density, the tick counts on the surviving moose started to drop. In the first year alone, they saw a significant difference. The moose in the cull zone were healthier. They had fewer ticks. The calves had a better survival rate. It proved that density was the trigger. But this is a bitter pill to swallow. It means that the days of seeing a moose around every corner in Maine might be over. To have healthy moose, we might have to accept having fewer moose. We have to choose between a large population of sick, dying ghosts or a smaller population of healthy, strong animals. It is a classic case of quality over quantity. But there are other ideas on the table too. Some researchers have looked into using fungal biopesticides, basically a fungus that kills ticks but doesn't hurt the moose. They even tested putting flea and tick collars on moose, like the ones you put on your dog. They used a chemical called permethrin. And guess what? It worked. The treated moose had 70% fewer ticks. But here's the catch. You can't go around the woods of Maine catching 60,000 wild animals and putting collars on them every year. It is logistically impossible. Plus, putting that much chemical into the environment could hurt other insects, birds, or fish. So we are back to the hard choice, managing the herd size. This situation in Maine is a warning for the rest of the world. It shows us how climate change isn't just about melting ice caps or hotter summers, it is about the invisible connections in nature. It is about how a few degrees of warmth can unlock a biological monster. As Lee Cantor said, the tick is acting as a predator, enhanced by the shifting climate. The winter tick has been weaponized by our warming planet. Maine's moose are tough. They are survivors, but they are facing an enemy they cannot fight with hooves or antlers. The future of the North Woods depends on how we manage this crisis. It requires us to make tough choices. It requires us to look at the data even when it is ugly. Because if we don't, the only moose left in Maine might be the ghosts haunting the snow. And that is a tragedy we cannot afford to let happen. We have to ask ourselves, are we willing to change how we view conservation? Are we willing to accept that sometimes we have to interfere to fix the mess we made? The silence in the forest is getting louder. The question is, are we listening? So would you support a mass hunt if it meant saving a species from extinction, or should we let nature take its brutal course? Let me know your take in the comments. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more deep dives into nature's darkest mysteries.